Shinobi, how are you, man? You well?
Well enough. Wondering why I lost power for such a long time period that my phone died and wasn't on when the charger came back on.
Shut up. Is this some bullshit excuse?
No, dude. If I did something like get shit faced and just overslept, I would have sat here and said, "Hey guys, I got shit faced and I overslept."
Well, we've got a guest today. For the first time on our tech shows, we've got a guest. Nadav, what do you think? Do you trust Shinobi?
I do, because he's definitely told me that he's gotten shit-faced before podcasts I've been on with him.
All right, we'll let this one slide. Nadav, welcome to the show. I've been really enjoying your super civilized and intellectual takedowns of people on Clubhouse. It's been an absolute joy to watch. I think I was messaging D++ straight away. I was like, this dude's amazing. She's like, he's the smartest guy in the whole world. So I'm glad to get you on the show. Glad to welcome you to the listeners of What Bitcoin Did. I'm looking forward to some of your smart intellectual comments today. Sorry if I'm embarrassing you here.
It's all right. It's very kind. I'm glad to be here.
Right. So, Shinobi, the background to wanting to make this show is a couple of things. But can I remind you of that thing you said to me once? I don't know if you still stand by it.
Yep. Go right ahead.
You said to me, base layer Bitcoin, Sats, Liquid, Wrap Bitcoin, they're all Bitcoin with different trade-offs. Now, I'm not sure everyone would agree with that. Do you remember saying that? Do you stand by it?
Yep, I still stand by it. I think that trying to play games like that is like a person who's playing games like only if my cash is physically in my hand is this US dollars. If it's in a bank, it's not you. Like, yes, it is. It's just in a bank and you need their permission to get it.
So they're all Bitcoin with different trade-offs. So it's a really interesting point because I kind of want to understand those trade-offs. I'm definitely going to push Nadav a bit on the Wrap Bitcoin stuff because I've heard some interesting takedowns on Clubhouse. And I think it's worth people understanding what it means to be using a Wrap Bitcoin and the trade-offs and the risks they're taking. If there are any, you might love them, Nadav. Well, I've got a feeling you don't, but we'll come to that. Anyway, okay, so Nadav, I don't know how much you know about the background to these shows we make. Me and Shinobi used to be enemies. He harassed me and abused me while I was sat on a plane in Boston for interviewing Peter Risen. And then since then, we've built this beautiful friendship around Bitcoin tech. And without really admitting it, he's basically said I was right about everything. And we now make these once a month shows.
Now.
No, we make these once a month shows about technical sides of Bitcoin. We go into detail. I make him explain to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And if I don't understand, we go like a 2-year-old. We've covered UTXOs. We've covered wallets. What was the other thing we did, Shinobi? What was the third one?
Nodes and why those are important.
Yeah, nodes. Yeah, forgot about those. Of course, I forgot about those. But these have proved to be really popular shows. They might not be the most downloaded, but they're the shows that get the most feedback. I get a lot of emails and DMs, people saying I love them. I think Shinobi's had a lot of people reach out to him as well, so they're really useful. But it's trying to help people understand this technical stuff at a basic level. So I know you guys have done.
And I do real quick though. I do want to just reiterate. To anybody who is sending me DM requests that haven't got a response, I'm sorry. It's not that I hate you. It's just I have to juggle a bunch of stuff with my time. So I try to avoid that folder, except occasional checks.
I mean, it's tough being famous and smoking weed all day. I don't know how you fit it all in, dude. Right. Listen, to get into this, I know you guys did some planning. We need to talk about why. Are we saying these are all layer 2? Because obviously I understand that Lightning Network's layer 2 and I understand that Liquid's layer 2. Are we essentially saying that Wrap Bitcoin are layer 2? Because it seems a different point, but I guess it is.
Yeah, I mean, I would say all of these are. I think Nadav agrees with me.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people quibble about what layer 2 means, and there's not really much consensus on it. I personally use it very loosely, and I think Shinobi does too, just to mean like off-chain Bitcoin, which all these would count as.
All right. So a good starting point, and I'm going to let you take this one, Nadav, because you're new. I'll throw you right into the cauldron. Do you want to talk about why layer 2 exists, why layer 2 is necessary to be built upon, or why layer 2 technologies are required to be built on top of Bitcoin? Because some people might be like, what the hell? Why can't the Bitcoin base chain do all of this?
Yeah. So essentially, blockchains solve a very specific problem, and that's their big innovation. But they suck at pretty much everything else. Which, I mean, maybe this is just a tautology. Like, they're good at everything that they're good at, and they suck at the things they're not good at. But I guess the point here is that they're good at like very little. They're good at this kind of distributed, decentralized, permissionless, somewhat trustless settlement system. But if you try to add anything on top of that, then you start to trade off and give up some of those things, either the decentralization or the permissionless or something like this, censorship resistant. So essentially, Bitcoin was designed very minimally for this reason. And, you can't just execute arbitrary programs on the Bitcoin blockchain, because then no one would be able to run a Bitcoin node, like Gail discussed in the last one. And so essentially, the idea behind kind of layer 2 and just layering on top of the Bitcoin blockchain is kind of to take these trade-offs in a way that doesn't affect people who don't want to take those trade-offs. So it's a way of kind of scaling, and there's other things you can get with this too, like privacy benefits and more expressive contracting and programming. But essentially, at the end of the day, you want to be using a blockchain for like this base layer settlement that you build on top of, because blockchains really suck, and like you shouldn't be storing arbitrary amounts of data or executing non-trivial programs on a blockchain.
Right. Can I attempt the TLDR?
Yeah, TLDR that, man.
So blockchains can't scale. Okay, anybody who's telling you a blockchain can scale is lying to you. So when we have a bunch of people like us who want Bitcoin to be this super decentralized hard money that anybody can settle in, and somebody else wants to do Bitcoin PayPal, you can't put that on the blockchain. So you have people send you your Bitcoin and you do Bitcoin PayPal with your own centralized database, because that does scale. And so like all the things that people want to do on top of Bitcoin, besides just that super hard money we can verify, that you just can't do that on the blockchain. It just won't work.
Well, Shinobi, let's break it down even further. Define super hard money. What is it about Bitcoin that makes it super hard money?
That we can all see the supply. We can all see when new coins are issued. We can all see that none of the rules are being broken there. And if all of us can't run a node, none of us can verify that. Well, do you think you could fit PayPal's entire transaction database on your MacBook, Peter?
No. But let's break that down, because again, let's get to the absolute basics. And I'll have a shot for once. Yeah, the way I see it, the simple way I see it, is that for anyone to be able to run a node, they have to be able to store the entire blockchain of data. And to be able to store the entire blockchain of data, we have to try and attempt, or the people who've programmed Bitcoin have try and attempt to keep the blockchain as small as possible. That's what it's about, really. So it can keep all transactions. And I would say that any trade-off to allow more data or anything else to be built on top of that is going to change the trade-off in terms of how many people can run a node.
That's great. I use layer 2 very broadly, and I also use big blocks very broadly. So I talk about like smart contracting platforms as just like bigger blocks with extra steps. The goal is to keep things small.
Nadav, let's talk about the trade-off, say, that Ethereum makes, and this isn't, let's rather than just have a Ethereum is shit, let's just be neutral about it. But what is the trade-off Ethereum makes versus Bitcoin, and what does that mean for users of Ethereum?
Yeah, so there are a lot of ways in which they differ, but I think the one we're talking about right now is just about kind of the considerations for decentralization of running nodes, and in those terms, Ethereum has more blocks with more computation required in order to do validation, and you have to keep track of state on top of accounts and all sorts of other things. So essentially, in the Ethereum world, the majority of users are not like running fully validating clients. They're trusting some set of like trusted clients that they just they essentially are running light clients. And so, this has some trade-offs. The benefits of people running light clients is that you can have kind of the base layer do a ton of stuff because not many people, I should say, are validating it in comparison to something like Bitcoin. Of course, the downside is that not many people are validating it. So, if your trusted people are lying to the people trusting them, then they can run away with all sorts of funds and all sorts of other kinds of attacks that you open yourself up to.
Right. Okay. So moving on from that, if we know that with regards to the Bitcoin-based chain, Shinobi, that we want to ensure that Bitcoin is maximally decentralized, which means keeping the block small, which means anyone can run a node from almost any device, old laptops, Raspberry Pis, etc. What is the history of scaling before we start actually talking about these layer 2 solutions? Can you talk to us about the history of scaling and when the discussions or the initial discussions around layer 2 technologies and how we've got to where we are now?
Well, that's going to be a long deviation from this outline here.
Well, give me the short version.
So
the TLDR.
Well,
TLDR.
Honestly, that conversation started the instant Satoshi published the white paper to the mailing list.
Okay.
Literally, the first response to that paper was from a man named James Donald, who literally his first response was, "This is a very interesting system. This is cool, but this doesn't scale. Like, this is not going to scale big enough for everybody to just transact on it." And so he specifically started talking about Xiaomi and eCash servers, a centralized private digital cash that David Chaum invented in the 80s and actually deployed a little bit with two banks in the 90s, and using those on top of Bitcoin as kind of a way to actually be able to scale to transact and get some privacy benefits out of it too. And that was literally the first response to Satoshi when he published the white paper. And then from there, you had Hal Finney and a lot of other people just kind of come to the conclusion that banks are going to be how we settle this and use this for money. And then obviously during the same period, you had a lot of other people's, Roger Ver, the people who eventually started the Bitcoin Cash crowd. They just wanted to make blocks bigger. And then during this whole kind of period, like a kind of quiet period where there wasn't really much discussion publicly about these differing attitudes, you started having things like basic payment channels get developed. And then kind of the paper for the Lightning Network came out in 2015, I think it was. And so kind of by the time that you would have had these two groups, the big blockers and the let's do Bitcoin banks, kind of smashing heads when all the block size wars started, by that time, you had these ideas for like the Lightning Network, Sidechains, these payment channel constructs. And so when that really came to a head, instead of just banks versus bigger blocks as the argument, like we had this whole new toolkit of all these second layers like Sidechains and the Lightning Network to play with as an alternative to bigger blocks. And so it kind of just naturally got to the point where the people who wanted to do bigger blocks left and did that. And we're kind of building out all these way better options than just use banks.
Yeah, and I think sidechain discussion started around 2014, so around the same time as Lightning.
For me, as somebody who doesn't really understand the technical side too well, it seems to me like the Lightning Network is a specific layer 2 technology, and then most of the other things we've talked about, Liquid or App to Bitcoin, and some of the other sidechain technologies I've heard of, all feel very similar. They maintain some kind of peg, so your Bitcoin gets locked up and you get issued some kind of other token. Am I right to think that there's kind of like the Lightning Network versus sidechains? Is that a fair way of seeing things?
I think I know what Shinobi, was your response going to be? They're both layer 2s. They just have different trade-offs or something like that.
Yeah, pretty much. I wouldn't say they're versus each other. It's just they're both optimized for different trade-offs. And
Okay.
Also a kind of nitpicky point to make is as long as a sidechain is based on Bitcoin, you can put Lightning on top of a sidechain. And like
Okay.
Lightning on the sidechain can talk to Lightning on the main chain. And like those things can interoperate between each other.
Yeah, one cool feature of Bitcoin's being so restrictive is that, essentially any layer on top of it that isn't more restrictive can interoperate with any other, because at the end of the day, they both settle down to Bitcoin.
Right. Okay, that's fair. Okay, so what's a better starting point? Should we start with the Lightning Network itself, or should we look at sidechains?
I'd say sidechains just because it's probably going to be easier for less technical users to kind of wrap their head around.
Okay, you start then, Shinobi. Explain what a sidechain is and how it works.
All right, so pretty much Bitcoin's blockchain doesn't scale. So let's make a new one. And when we make a new blockchain, you can really do whatever you want. We could just copy paste the Bitcoin code as it exists now and replace mining with something, and kapoof, that's a sidechain. Or we could take the Ethereum code base. Why would you want to do this? I don't know. Some people have, though. And you can just make a sidechain on Bitcoin with that. And so it's really the important thing to think about is you're just making a new blockchain, and those rules can be whatever you want them to be. But the catch is pegging the Bitcoin in. You have to put that Bitcoin on the main chain somewhere to create some kind of guarantee that when you get this new Bitcoin token on the sidechain and you spend that and you do things with that, that the money sitting on the main chain doesn't just disappear before you go to claim it, to make sure that anybody who moves that main chain Bitcoin is only people who have Bitcoin on the sidechain, so nobody can lose their money. And there's really a lot of different ways to do that, but the real only deployed way today is with a multi-sig address. So you just have this group of companies.
I'm going to slow you up. We're going to go in a few slower steps. Okay, sorry, Shinobi. you know I do this. Okay, firstly, I just want to cover what we mean by scaling. Okay, what we're trying to do here by scaling Bitcoin is trying to either either and, should I say, but we're trying to allow for people to do a little bit more with their Bitcoin, whether it's to move Bitcoin around a little bit faster or achieve more transactions, throughput. That's what we're trying to achieve. Or perhaps even you may even execute some kind of smart contract code. But we're trying to do more with Bitcoin. But we're trying to do that in a separate environment without affecting the base chain. God, I always think I know what I'm saying by explaining it badly. Is that okay? Have I got that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, block space is scarce. And so we want to kind of be able to use Bitcoin without competing with everyone else for the scarce block space.
But these side chains also themselves come with trade-offs. So I think one of the easiest ways, why don't we use a specific side chain as an example? Can we go with Liquid, Shinobi?
Yeah, that works. So
yeah, and just my basic understanding of Liquid is that I lock up Bitcoin and then I receive Liquid Bitcoin. And with Liquid Bitcoin, I'm in a new specific blockchain, which allows me to do other things. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like pretty much in order to get Bitcoin on Liquid, how Liquid works is you have the federation. And so that's just a big multi-sig address. And that's used, one, to actually sign blocks on the sidechain. So instead of proof of work and mining for blocks, you just have the federation sign them. And as long as the threshold of the federation signs it, that's a valid block, accepted. And also, the federation also has custody of all the Bitcoin on the side chain in a multi-sig on the main Bitcoin chain. So the like real high level of the consensus is you just put Bitcoin into this federation's multi-sig, and they issue this token backed by that Bitcoin on the sidechain. And then that multi-sig address is totally in control of the coins on the main chain, of what's happening on the side chain. You completely have to trust that at least that threshold required to sign from the federation will act honestly, both in operating the sidechain itself and not stealing anybody's Bitcoin on the main chain.
Okay. Is it fair to say that Liquid Bitcoin is a form of custodial Bitcoin? If I'm having to trust the federation?
I would say it's fair to point out similarities there. I wouldn't call it outright custodial, because instead of a single entity having total control to do whatever you want, you have to have that threshold of members in the federation agree to do something. So like
Yeah.
multiple people have to agree in order to like steal your money. There isn't the one person that can just do that.
I think
Yeah.
I would consider it like a distributed custodianship,
Mhm.
where like, the most distributed custodianship is just having your own keys on Bitcoin, and then there's things in between, and then there's like putting your funds on like Coinbase or Gemini or Kraken or something, and then this is a bit more distributed than that.
Okay, so just so people understand, with the Bitcoin base layer blockchain, every 10 minutes a miner mines a new block, approximately, and that will include all the transactions that have been created, blah blah blah. But on the Liquid blockchain, the blocks aren't mined; they're signed for by the federation. So it should probably explain the federation a bit. Who's in the federation? How many? What the type of people who signed up? How many have to sign a block? How does that all work?
Well, it's pretty much just ran by exchanges in the space, and actually some legacy financial institutions. Like the Swiss Stock Exchange is one of the federation members. But I think for the on-chain wallet, it's a 12 of 15, I think, multi-sig, because until we get Taproot, that's the biggest multi-sig that you can make, is 15 people. And then for the sidechain consensus, I think there might actually be more signers than that, because there is kind of like a membership tier in Liquid where you can be like part of the federation, so to say, in that you are a registered business. You can process withdrawals out of Liquid for customers, but you're not actually part of the multi-sig that's holding keys on the main chain or signing sidechain blocks. And then there's kind of that higher tiered federation member where you're actually participating in custodying the funds on the main chain, signing the blocks. And they also just released in the newest node client for that support for something called a dynamic federation. so now pretty much the members with whatever thresholds are needed can add or remove different members from the federation. So let's say one company, they haven't been managing their servers right, they went down. Like that company is just consistently not signing blocks for the sidechain. They're not signing withdrawals when they should. A majority of the federation can kind of just kick them out of the multi-sig, remove them from signing blocks on the sidechain, move the coins on the main chain, and remove their key from that. And they could also add new members. Like, we just lost a member of the federation. Somebody else who is going to be reliable wants to join. They can just add him in as well. And so it's instead of like just this static group, it's kind of this this evolving set that can change whenever a majority of them want to change. And I point that out because I think for people who want to use something like Liquid, that's an important thing to pay attention to. Like members, like let's say you start using the network right now because you trust the people operating it right now. There is possibility that changes over time. And so if you're a user of that network, that's something you should pay attention to and be aware of.
Okay.
Yeah. So with something like Liquid, the federation is this like consortium of businesses that have a vested interest in Liquid existing, and they're trusted not like as individuals but as a group.
Right. Okay. So what's the use case for Liquid? Who's using Liquid? Why would they use it? It seems to me like something like Lightning is something I can pretty much send Bitcoin to anyone with it. Like Nadav, if you wanted to receive some sats, I could send it to you. You've probably got a Lightning wallet. Say we use Shinobi. A lot of people in Bitcoin do. Lightning seems a bit different. Who would be using Lightning? Liquid. Who would be using Liquid and for what purpose?
Well, originally the kind of main idea behind it is for traders. Like if you look at transactions on the blockchain, I think at times up to like 50% of them are literally just coins moving between exchanges because you have traders taking advantage of price differences. And so the original kind of purpose for Liquid was just give traders a little walled garden where they can just move things between exchanges quickly and not eat up all this main chain block space that could be used by Lightning users or people actually using it as money. But really though, there's a lot of potential uses beyond that. Like the ability that or the ability to upgrade it much more quickly because it's not the main chain. These businesses can just coordinate and upgrade things. There's a lot of potential for more flexible smart contract stuff that we can't do as easily right now on the main chain. And also just if you're okay with that trust environment, and that's the key point here. It's also just a cheaper layer to move or manage Bitcoin. I mean, like if over the next couple years fees start going up, they stay up. It's going to be very hard for somebody who wants to buy like $100 of Bitcoin and self-custody it. Like that's going to be very expensive for them. But if they're okay with the kind of trust model of a sidechain like Liquid, that might actually be much more affordable for them there.
Do the Liquid blocks have a block size?
Yes.
Yeah. They do come every minute though, instead of 10 minutes.
Every minute. And when they come every minute, do they confirm every minute rather than waiting for a certain number of confirmations?
Yeah, you can pretty much treat after the first block built on top of that as good enough because none of the Federation members will ever do a reorg more than one block.
Right. Okay. So really, it sounds to me like Liquid is almost like it's almost what it says. It's a sidechain. It's a kind of separate environment whereby you trade in your Bitcoin, you receive Liquid Bitcoin, you can move it around that network quickly. I could move some Liquid Bitcoin to Nadav. Nadav, you could move it onto an exchange. You can move it from one exchange to another. It just gives you a lot more flexibility. And then perhaps when you're done in that environment, you can then withdraw your Lightning and you get base chain Bitcoin back. But also, like you're saying, Shinobi, it might get to a point at some point in the future where actually people just hold liquid Bitcoin and don't actually hold base chain Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I also I think they have some other experiments going on in liquid, like Shinobi mentioned. It's a good kind of breeding ground for experimentation since it's much easier and kind of more centralized to do updates than on like a public ledger like Bitcoin. So I think Liquid also has like confidential transactions that's like Zcash like technology that they're experimenting with, and they have like issuing of new assets and things. So people are like playing around with NFTs, however we think about them. You can do these kinds of things on a sidechain as well.
Okay. So just my final question on something like specific to Liquid. If we trust it enough and it is faster and cheaper to move liquid Bitcoin around within that network than on the base chain, is there a scenario where Liquid expands so much that so many people are putting their Bitcoin within Liquid that actually is a risk to the base chain?
Well, I mean, potentially, but I would say that risk exists for anything. Like that could be Coinbase, or that could be JP Morgan or a Bitcoin ETF. Like too much of all the coins going to one place is bad, no matter where that place is, if it's like a centralized place.
Yeah, though I would say it's probably worse for the people using Liquid than, say, the people who just have Bitcoin on main chain, because it's kind of like this bigger honey pot now. And maybe there's more incentive to like exit scam or something like this.
Yeah, but I guess then it comes down to who is part of that federation, and it has to be the right companies where there's no incentive for them to do that because it destroys Bitcoin.
Hey, Peter, I'm gonna blow your mind right now.
Go on, blow my mind, dude.
You could have multiple federations on a single sidechain like Liquid. Like there is absolutely no reason why the air quote official Liquid Federation has to be the only people who accept Bitcoin on the main chain and give you Bitcoin tokens on the sidechain. You could have 12 different federations on Liquid if people wanted to do that.
To be clear, Shinobi, though, that would mean that there are like 12 different side chains, right? It's not like there's one side chain with multiple federations.
You could do that on one side chain. Like right now, Nadav, I could just go issue an asset on Liquid. You can send me Bitcoin, and you can have Shinobi's Bitcoin on Liquid instead of the official federation.
Got you. So you're talking about like a side chain off of a side chain, kind of, if I'm understanding you correctly.
I mean, you could do it that way, or just directly on the same sidechain.
Right. Okay. Well, look, my general understanding for Liquid, therefore, is that it has a certain use case for certain people who want to move around Bitcoin in a certain environment quickly and easy at lower cost. I don't personally have a use for that right now. I'm not a trader. Perhaps if I was arbing between certain exchanges, I might look at it, but I understand it. Okay.
I think one last important thing to note is that part of the reason why this makes a lot of sense for traders is kind of the downside of the sidechain, or at least this federated two-way peg sidechain, is that you have to trust the federation. But traders are already trusting all of these exchanges while they're doing their normal business activity, so it makes a lot of sense for them.
Can you explain what the peg is and how that is maintained?
Actually, I think, Nadav, if you want to go into this would probably be a good point to kind of generalize the concept of the peg and kind of get into that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, at a super high level, and then I'll let Shinobi maybe take it a bit deeper. A peg is just any mechanism that you can use to essentially take Bitcoin off or out of the Bitcoin blockchain and essentially bring it elsewhere, such as onto a sidechain or onto Lightning. Well, maybe we don't want to get into that yet, but such as onto a sidechain. And then if it's a two-way peg, you should also be able to then take it back. So essentially destroy the off-chain Bitcoin and reclaim the on-chain Bitcoin. Though maybe just as a quick note, like the simplest kind of peg is just a one-way peg where you burn your coins on-chain. So you provably destroy Bitcoin by sending it to like not a random address, but like an address that no one knows the private key for. So you can like send it to some specific message that was not constructed by generating a private key or something like this, or just to an unspendable location like an op return. And so you provably burn your Bitcoin in a way that gives you this off-chain token, but then you can never claim it back. So this has probably very different use cases than something like Liquid, where you want to be able to get your Bitcoin back. But yeah, most people I think are more interested in two-way pegs, though I think there's some fun little projects out there where you literally just burn your Bitcoin and get this off-chain kind of Bitcoin.
Burning your Bitcoin sounds scary.
Yeah, it does, but I think it's maybe a little less scary than you might initially think. For one, I don't think any of these kind of proof of burn, like one-way pegs, I don't think any of them are advertised as like a store of value. It's more so like to use it. So maybe you burn like $5. And then now you can use this other smart contracting platform or whatever on a sidechain without introducing like a new token. And then the other thing to note is like when other people are burning their coins, you shouldn't mind too much because that's good for you as a Bitcoin holder.
Go burn those coins.
Yeah, go burn those coins. And so a notable one-way peg would be like Counterparty, where which is a Bitcoin, I think we'd call it a sidechain, where you burn. I know not too much about Counterparty other than that that's where the rare Pepes existed, and so the original NFTs were on this one-way peg sidechain of Bitcoin back in, I don't remember when, but a while ago. But yeah, maybe more interesting is kind of two-way peg mechanisms because they're harder, like provably burning coins and then never having to worry about bringing those coins back onto Bitcoin is not as difficult as trying to maintain a two-way peg where you can like freeze on-chain funds in order to get off-chain funds and then burn the off-chain funds in order to unfreeze your on-chain funds is, I guess, how I would describe a normal two-way peg.
Yeah, I still, that concept of burning your Bitcoin to get some other token coin somewhere else, I don't know, that sounds scary. Let's move on to the wrap Bitcoin. I think there's a potential some people listening so far are going to be like, what the fuck? I've got no idea what you lot just talked about.
There's still one fun thing I think we should get into. So I think like just when it comes to sidechain pegs, there's one important thing to understand. This is the most important thing. Whatever security claims that the sidechain is making about the actual sidechain itself can never be greater than the security claims of the peg that's actually putting Bitcoin on that chain. You know, like one thing we didn't get into is there are proposals to, instead of using the Federation and like a multi-sig as a two-way peg, you can use miners. Like we would create a new opcode that would let miners just kind of take control of coins with a long time lock. And the idea would be that you trust majority of miners to be honest. And when you want to leave the sidechain, you would make your transaction on the sidechain. And after a long time delay, to guarantee that honest miners can call shenanigans if some miners are trying to steal money, it would just unlock the coins and give them back on the main chain. But there's a lot of incentive concerns there in terms of maybe bringing more centralization pressures to mining doing that. But there are some sidechains out there, such as Rootstock, that use proof of work for the sidechain block consensus. but they use a multi-sig for the peg because there's no support for using miners for that right now. And so I kind of just want to point out, like, even though they're using mining and proof of work on the sidechain, none of that security transfers over to the Bitcoin on that sidechain. Like, it would apply to like some new tokens or NFT stuff that you minted there because those only exist on the sidechain. But the security of the Bitcoin, it gains absolutely nothing by the sidechain having miners because that peg is still a multi-sig that some group of people control.
Yeah, and as a last note, I think it's probably worth mentioning, the state of sidechains these days is very much oriented around these kind of federations that you trust, that use some kind of multi-sig on-chain. But sidechain research is like very much like cutting edge active research that people are doing today. So I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years we have like a much cooler, different story. But it's very much kind of open research that's still happening.
I'm pretty sure a lot of people will have heard these us talk about liquid sidechain, and for a lot have been like, what the fuck are you guys on about? But I think wrap Bitcoin, there's a bit more interest because, not that I agree with it, and I would never wrap my Bitcoin. It sounds scary as hell. But the idea that people can do a little bit more with their Bitcoin on the Ethereum blockchain, they can essentially use it to earn yield and blah, blah, blah. I think there's going to be some more interest in that. I think at the same time, there's going to be some people losing their shit going, fucking, why are you covering this? Just call it a scam. Wrap Bitcoin and not Bitcoin. Go to fucking hell, blah, blah, blah. But I think just to do it justice, that, I know it's like something like a bit over $1 billion or something. Maybe it's even more is locked up. There's a lot of Bitcoin that is locked up as wrap Bitcoin right now. So I think people should definitely hear about it, and if it's a negative, they should hear why. Just first and foremost, and you both should answer, but I'll start with you, Nadav. Like, do you have a general opinion on wrap Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think honestly, it's not too far removed from things like sidechains, in the sense that if you're willing to trust some parties, then it's not too different between using a sidechain and using wrapped Bitcoin. Though I will say, using wrapped Bitcoin is just inherently going to be a little bit more risky because you not only need to trust some peg, but you also need to trust that this other blockchain you're using works, and its consensus mechanism works, and its cryptography works, and it doesn't have any bugs, and it isn't going to be forked tomorrow into something entirely different, and all sorts of these kinds of other newer considerations. And I think, though, maybe one of the key differentiators that makes this maybe a little less interesting to me than sidechains is that at the end of the day, in order for these things to work, you are kind of relying on another token as storing some kind of value in order to maintain the security of that other system. So, if you're someone who thinks like in the long term, Bitcoin is going to be much, much more valuable than these other tokens, just, as a thing that stores value, then you're not actually going to be able to securely lock up very much Bitcoin elsewhere. It just won't make very much sense. So I think it's more interesting today than it will be in the future. So just from like a research and technology perspective, I find it a little less interesting. But I guess I'm trying to stay pretty open-minded about it as something, at least for now, as a way to play around with Bitcoin elsewhere. Shinobi, I'd be curious what your opinion is, though.
Well, I think you are exactly correct as far as kind of framing it as a sidechain. I mean, that's literally all it is. It's a trusted peg with, I think, BitGo. And yeah, it's just using Ethereum as if it were a sidechain. So yeah, I mean, Peter, like, I think this is just as much Bitcoin as any Bitcoin on the liquid sidechain is. But yeah. really the only reason this exists is because there is so much degenerate trading nonsense that exists for no reason than to take suckers' money on Ethereum. And there are enough traders in this space who denominate and want to trade in Bitcoin off of that. So here you go. Somebody did it.
Right. So in some ways, the wrap Bitcoin is similar to Liquid in that you are sending your Bitcoin to a multi-sig where it's locked up and you're being issued a token on Ethereum in return. And at the point you want your base chain Bitcoin back, you're sending the Ethereum back to whatever wallet that goes to, and you're receiving your Bitcoin back. I understand that it's very similar in terms of that, but once you're on the Ethereum network with your Bitcoin, we know there's a little bit more flexibility. You can move it around quicker. They have yield services. There is trading.
Yes,
there's a whole
Peter,
bunch of things they can do.
There is an infinitely larger way or number of ways to lose your money, Peter. Yes,
well, that's the point.
You can experience the joys of paying transaction fees when the transaction fails and doesn't go through. You can experience the joys of thinking you're about to get your winning shitcoin trade and having some miner undercut your trade transaction with their own in a block. You can experience the joys of smart contract failures, fees higher than Bitcoin fees were at the highest peak. All of these joys can be yours if you just wrap your Bitcoin on Ethereum.
So basically, you're exposing yourself to all the issues or problems that people have identified with Ethereum. Is basically that's what you're saying. Yeah. Are there any examples where people have lost their wrapped Bitcoin or wrapped Bitcoin have been stolen? Do we know of any of those yet?
Not off the top of my head, but honestly, these days, I really don't pay attention to the shit show of Ethereum that much. I feel confident saying it's likely that some have been stolen in a smart contract exploit. I would say that is highly likely by now.
Depending on your semantics for whether you consider that stealing, right? Shinobi? If it's just a bad contract that you put your money into.
Mm-hmm. That is definitely an argument to have.
So Nadav, I want you to do one of your more interesting kind of thing, Coinbase Clubhouse takedowns of this. Start talking about some of the risks that people are exposing themselves to, specifically with Ethereum. I've heard you explain in very civil and very detailed and understandable way of some of the massive issues associated with Ethereum. Do you want to take that very broad question and pick off what you want to choose from that?
I guess there's a couple things. So one of them we've already kind of discussed, which is it's very challenging to actually run a validating Ethereum node. So you aren't in most cases, people aren't just trusting this peg, right, in order to have these wrapped Bitcoin, but they'd also be running a light client and trusting some other validating entity in order to do validation. So, you could be told that, you received something in return for your wrapped Bitcoin when you really didn't. There's all sorts of kinds of games that you're essentially you are just inherently, as not being a full validator, you are inherently at greater risk of being lied to or thinking that things are a certain way that they aren't. There are also kind of the risks Shinobi mentioned, where Ethereum in particular, right, uses Solidity as a programming language. It's not an ideal programming language for contracting. If I guess that's an opinion, but I as someone who works in like strong type system programming languages for the purpose of not burning people's money, the idea of using anything like JavaScript to store people's funds and decide who gets what funds in a contract is just absolutely mortifying to me. There's so much attack surface when it comes to complex Solidity scripts. It's though I will note this isn't something that's like inherent to a smart contracting platform, but you do, I guess, just inherently, if there's more functionality, there's more things that could go wrong, just at a high level. So yeah, I think those are probably two of the bigger risks. I guess there are also some others with respect to kind of the how Ethereum changes, right? They hard fork very frequently. They have kind of a very centralized leadership that makes decisions on how Ethereum is going to change. It's kind of just a bunch of these risks wrapped into this one ecosystem where kind of everything in the background you always have to keep in mind, like the security of this blockchain is actually tied to the value of this token. And, in Bitcoin, we have this kind of nice property that, like, Bitcoin, the asset, is a desirable thing. It's not, when people are using, when people are using Ethereum, right? Ethereum, in some sense, is kind of analogous to, I'm being a bit loose here, so like don't come after me on Twitter, but ETH, the token, is not an asset that you want to hold in the same way that Bitcoin is, right? When people are buying Bitcoin, they are thinking of it as like a long-term store of value investment. Ethereum acts more like a banking fee, right? It's like this fee that you pay in order to use the Ethereum network. And, if you're buying ETH or these other tokens for blockchains, kind of like as an investment in your head, it's kind of like investing in banking fees. It doesn't really make much sense as this store of value token. And at the end of the day, like the security of not only like, proof of work and the Ethereum blockchain, but also lots of these contract schemes with like distributed, well, it depends on the model, but some of these decentralized exchanges and things like this are also relying on, the value of ETH not dropping, especially, if you're thinking about this in the long term. I just think that there's kind of a lot to unwrap when it comes to what are these extra risks you're taking if you're using something like wrapped Bitcoin or, Ethereum just more generally. I will say, though, I don't want to paint a picture of like, this is garbage, no one should ever use it. I mean, maybe in the long term, but the bigger point I want to just make is that you should not view holding ETH as an investment in the same way as holding Bitcoin. I think that there are some fundamental differences there. And I think that a lot of people not understanding those fundamental differences leads to, the information asymmetry that's just perfect for scammers. Like, you don't want to expose yourself to that. You want to really understand what it is that you're holding.
Not to defend ETH, because I don't own any, despite someone giving me lots of hot tips to buy it recently. ETH might be one of the few cryptocurrencies that actually also trends upwards over multiple years and cycles. Now, look, there's a lot of bullshit that goes in there. They're changing their monetary policy, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, some people would argue, well, it's still proven to be a good investment over a long enough time period, perhaps how Bitcoin has. Are you saying you shouldn't treat it like Bitcoin? Because in some ways, I see Bitcoin now as not a beta. Like, I was doing an interview with Dan Held earlier, and he said, if Bitcoin succeeds, I kind of feel like it already has. Are you saying that there's too many long-term risks with ETH for it to be trusted as an investment?
I think that's part of it, but I also think, just like fundamentally speaking, like if you put speculation aside, which maybe you can't, like the Bitcoin's goal is to store value, and Ethereum, again, speaking loosely, Bitcoin is not one person who has a goal. It's a bunch of different people, and it's different for different people what it is. But generally speaking, I think it's relatively fair to say that Bitcoin's goal is to be this store of value, this thing that people put value into. You can see in its monetary policy and in its design and in the way that it changes when we're discussing things like soft forks and Taproot and things like this. That it's really like, fundamentally speaking, we want to make sure that it's this good money. Whereas I think if you look at how ETH is designed, it's really meant for experimenting with like these smart contract things and decentralized computing of some kind. First of all, I personally think, like moving to proof of stake and all of these other things that are in the plans or in the roadmap or whatever for ETH, like I have my own like very, very large issues with proof of stake. I think that comparing it to proof of work is pretty silly. It's really just this very different like trust model. It's not a consensus model in the same way that proof of work is. I think Bitcoin has proven itself, value and speculation aside, Bitcoin has proven itself to be a protocol that is kind of has the properties you would want in a store of value, in terms of like, it's very hard to change. When it does change, it requires this broad, consensus. And it has these certain priorities. Whereas if you look at ETH, they hard fork all the time, centralized leadership, relatively speaking, at the very least. I think that, the value of it aside, the actual, like what it is, technologically speaking, like what is ETH, I think isn't as conducive as an investment, so much as, the other arguments that have been made that I'm more sympathetic with, that it's like a utility of some kind, as opposed to like this money, this store of value.
Okay, so it is an ultrasound money.
This topic in about 30 seconds.
Okay.
Anybody who is thinking of ETH as an investment should ask themselves these questions. Look at all the clones of Ethereum, the more and more centralized clones like Binance Chain. Think about the fact that JP Morgan has forked and made a private version of Ethereum before, and start thinking about the direction they're going to solve all of their problems with zero knowledge proofs to handle all scalability. Well, at this point, really, why isn't that going to go anyway except all of these financial institutions, because they're going to be the only ones who could run validating nodes for something that unscalable in the first place, just have their own little private database. And they just reconcile their completely private databases with zero knowledge proofs. And then what value does a public Ethereum network and the asset of Ether have when all the utility of all of this just boiled down to you guys finally got banks to replace COBOL?
That's fair. I mean, I don't invest in ETH anyway. I don't care about people who do. Like, I'm not going to go on Twitter and yell at people anymore for that, because I've tried that, and I can't technically argue it. And at the same time, look, if people want to do stupid stuff, they want to. I think I think you can make a fair argument that if you pick the right time frame, ETH is a good investment. Whether you think ETH is a good product is a different thing, but people invest to make money on bad products. I think it's a bad product, but on the right time frame, you could. Look,
Keith, that's a good trade.
That's
a good trade. An investment. You're making a trade. You are short-term timing the market to profit off of something. You're not making a long-term investment.
Yeah, but what's the difference between an investment and a trade? What's the time frame that makes a difference between a trade and an investment? Like, a trade to me is something, traders going in and out of the market. But there were some people who will invest in Ethereum, and perhaps over multiple months, even over a couple of years, they might, on the right time frame, outperform Bitcoin. That is a potential.
I think maybe one thing to point out, though, even on this point, is that even if we want to call it investing, we should still make sure to delineate in our minds, this is not like investing in like a stock, right? Like, as I mentioned, ETH there's the speculative aspect to it, but in some sense, it's at least a little bit similar to, like, as I mentioned, investing in the thing you pay fees with, like investing in banking fees in some sense, as opposed to investing in like a bank or in a company or something like this. I don't think that it's fair to market investing in ETH as like investing in the ecosystem, because that's not what you're doing at the end of the day. Which is also, I think, why I semantically would go closer to calling it trading, because you're just taking part in this speculative environment. You're not really, like, the way to invest in the ETH ecosystem, is not to buy ETH, right? That's not equity. You could invest in companies built on top of Ethereum by actually buying equity. You could do things like this. And I would maybe call that something closer to investment. But even kind of, I guess, yeah, the difference between a trade and an investment is just kind of like this semantic, somewhat murky water. But I would err on the side of, I get when people talk about investing in something like ETH. It's just, I hope that they also internally like understand what the differences are compared to other things that they would call investments.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I've got no reason to defend ETH, but I still know that yelling at people has never stopped them. And I also imagine even some of your more civilized takedowns, Nadav, have still not changed people's opinion on it. People are going to do what they're going to do. I hope
they don't view them as takedowns when I'm just having a discussion, but I know what you're saying. Oh, okay.
I love it. But it was mainly, actually, the one I remember most was the guy from Polkadot. That was pretty savage. Okay, well, listen, we've dealt with Wrapped Bitcoin. Let's move on to a Lightning. I'll let you kick this one off, Shinobi. Is Lightning the best layer 2 technology we have?
I'm going to pass the baton to the man actually building in this space and just maybe normie it down a bit if necessary. But
all right.
I think Nadav should start this one.
So Nadav, would you say that the Lightning Network is the best second layer technology we have? And are there reasons why you would say that?
Yes, if the trade-offs you're going for have to do with, like, if you're a trader and you're trusting exchanges anyway, then I could see arguments to be made for other kinds of layer 2s. But I think for what a lot of Bitcoiners are looking for in they kind of want to be able to spend their Bitcoin maybe, or at least use it, for payments. I think that, and they want to do it in a way where they are never giving custody to someone else and requiring trust in that way. And they want to remain kind of these fully validating, fully like sovereign in some sense entities. I think that Lightning is kind of the thing they're looking for. Yeah. So should I explain what Lightning is at a high level?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's explain how it works.
Assume you're talking to people who just learned what a UTXO is.
Alrighty. So so you understand, if you have Bitcoin, what you really have is the ability to spend a UTXO. So I guess we also discussed sidechains a little bit. So there is some similarity here, though there are some important differences. The similarity is what we're going to be doing is we're going to be locking up our Bitcoin on-chain in order to get our Bitcoin on Lightning. And then we can spend it on Lightning and, later reclaim it on-chain. But we're not going to be using a federation or a peg, really. So how this works is maybe let's start by talking about just what a single Lightning channel looks like. So we'll get to this whole network that is called the Lightning Network, but one of the more fundamental pieces of technology is just the ability to have a payment channel. So you can think of a payment channel a bit like a bar tab. if you go to a bar, you or at least in the US, you can like hand them your credit card. They'll open a tab. You can make as many payments in exchange for drinks or whatever else, food, as you want. And then at the end, when it's time to leave, then you close the tab and then you make a single payment. And this, you can think of this as helping avoid using the actual payment rails, except for at the very end, essentially, to avoid fees. And, if you're talking about something like Bitcoin, it's also, much faster. They don't have to swipe your card each time, where swiping your card in Bitcoin, or the analogy here, it takes 10 minutes, maybe 30, maybe an hour. So it's this much faster kind of instant settlement, if you will. So this is kind of what channels are attempting to do. It's essentially just this trustless cooperation mechanism where if I open a channel with Shinobi, it's like an open tab between the two of us. We can send funds back and forth. It's like a private ledger instead of a public ledger. And then at the very, if we're done interacting with one another, then maybe we can go on chain and just do the aggregate of all of our transactions. But the key thing here is that unlike kind of these analogies I've been making, since this is actually built on top of Bitcoin in a relatively clever way, it doesn't require that me and Shinobi trust one another to uphold this tab, right? If we were just willing to trust one another, not really much use in a blockchain if everyone is just willing to trust one another. So what Lightning channels kind of look like are we are going to move our funds into a shared UTXO, a 2 of 2 multi-signature between, say, me and my channel counterparty, Shinobi. The reason that we do that is now those funds cannot be spent on chain, right? It would require me and Shinobi in order to sign off on that. And so that means that I can't take my funds, which are supposed to be locked up in this tab, and spend them on chain without Shinobi knowing about it because it requires his signature. So on chain, what we have is this shared custody model, this 2 of 2 multi-signature. And so this is what makes it so that we know we're not like double spending. That's the locking mechanism. And then, to unlock, if we're both agreeing, we can just sign like who has what and send those funds off in Bitcoin world when we're closing our Lightning channel. And then the last piece of this puzzle is in order to make this actually trustless, we need a way in order to essentially have some kind of state of our tab, of our channel, who has what funds, that doesn't require cooperation in order to enforce, right? We want to be able to commit to a state in a way that once I've committed to a state, then Shinobi can send the coins in to me and him as we deserve them on chain without me, unilaterally. So how this works is we have what's called a pre-signed transaction, or you can think of this as just a transaction that's like fully valid. Me and Shinobi have both signed it. That spends our shared custody funds, our 2 of 2 multi-sig, and outputs his balance to him and my balance to me. But the thing we do with this transaction is we just don't broadcast it. We just hold on to it. And then so long as we're both cooperating, we are able to essentially update this transaction and revoke the old state. So you can essentially update this transaction. And at any time, if ever there's like a disagreement, Shinobi disappears, I just want to close my channel, I'm done with it, then I just broadcast this fully valid transaction. And it doesn't require any cooperation from Shinobi in order to do that. So essentially, the Lightning Network is just a way to use Bitcoin in a way that so long as me and my channel counterparty are cooperating, we can send funds back and forth, have essentially instant settlement, pay no on-chain fees, don't even touch a blockchain, unless there's a dispute or we have some other reason why we need to close that channel. And then The last thing that, so, this is maybe, as I've described it so far, useful for like, two businesses that pay each other often, or two friends that pay each other often. But what about like, how does this actually help us scale to do payments between two arbitrary peers, right? Like, how am I supposed to pay someone I've never met, that I just met, that I want to pay over the Lightning Network? Well, how it works is you can actually connect Lightning channels. So if I have a channel to Shinobi and Shinobi has a channel open with Peter, then I can essentially pay Shinobi to pay Peter, and we can essentially do these routed payments. And then the cool thing about Lightning and the way that this is all set up is, since our Lightning channel state is just a Bitcoin transaction, you can think of that as essentially, as I mentioned, a private ledger between me and Shinobi, where this ledger, normally it just has like my balance, his balance. But really, it's as powerful, as expressive as the Bitcoin blockchain in terms of the kinds of contracts that you can write up, right? Bitcoin has some minimal scripting. You can do multi-sig, you can do time locks, hash locks, these kinds of things. So essentially, anything that you could put on the Bitcoin blockchain, you could put on this private channel between me and Shinobi. And so one example of a contract that you can have in Bitcoin is called an atomic swap, which is essentially a trustless way of, I send coins to you and you send coins to me, like different coins. And we can essentially use these things called hash locks to make this atomic, so that I can only claim my funds if I've sent you your funds. So they either both fail or they both succeed. And so we just put these in Lightning channels. And how this happens then is I essentially don't just pay Shinobi right away. I don't move my money into his balance. Instead, I move it into this intermediate place just as an output on our transaction, on our state, so that it says Shinobi can claim these funds if he tells me this secret, the preimage to a hash or something like that. It's like, reveal the secret to this thing, the secret behind this thing, and you can claim these funds. But the trick here is that Shinobi doesn't know the secret. Peter does. So then I tell Shinobi, if you want to know what the secret is, you have to pay Peter this much. That's what he's expecting. And then Shinobi sets up the same contingent payment in his channel with Peter, where he's like, I'll pay you if you give me this secret. And then he takes maybe like a small fee. Like, we're talking like millisatoshis. And then, Peter, who wants to get paid by me, will accept that payment. And how he does that is he reveals the secret to Shinobi so that he can claim his funds. And then they update it and actually move it into his balance. And then now Shinobi knows the secret, and so he gives it to me. And keep in mind, right, if he never got the secret from Peter, that means he never lost funds. So if he did get the secret, that's the only way he could have lost funds. But since he has the secret, now he can claim his payment from me. So the routing nodes never get footed with the bill. And essentially, this is the technology that allows us to link these channels up. And so you can imagine, like, this is a very simple, like, we just routed through Shinobi for me to pay Peter, even though I don't even have a channel open to Peter. But you can have 20 hops. I can pay through a bunch of different channels and eventually reach the person who I've never met before who I'm trying to pay. So really, just by opening a single Lightning channel with another person who has some Lightning channels open, like if you're just joining the network, you already have access to basically the entire network that you would want to have access to after just opening a channel or two.
Right. I'm going to make you break this down a little bit easier now.
Yeah.
That's a good explanation. And I'm going to say one of those things that pisses people off, and they say, Pete, don't do this. But I think a lot of people just won't give a shit. They'll be like, I just want to use it.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, I don't know. And I'm glad you explained it. And it's not, I don't appreciate it. I do. It's more to say that when I use the Visa network, I don't understand how money gets moved behind it. I swipe my card and the money goes. And yes, I understand with Bitcoin, we need a little bit more responsibility. I do understand that. But just for the basics, I want to use the Lightning network, Nadav. Okay, I've got my Lightning wallet. I've set up my node. I've downloaded Umbro. I've set it all up, and it says open channels. What is happening when I click and open a channel?
Yeah. So great question. So when you open a channel, what that means is that you are moving your funds into a shared custody with a channel counterparty. And that allows you then to spend it over Lightning and no longer to spend it on the Bitcoin blockchain itself.
So if I open up a channel with you, and that's my only channel, but say you've got, 10 channels, by the time I've used you to send some sats to somebody random across the network, it's going to go via our channel, via a bunch of other channels to get to that person.
That's right. So, and all of this should be hidden from you if you're using any reasonable wallet, right? You'll just open a channel to me, and then you'll be able to just pay, like someone gives you an invoice, you pay that invoice, it's a QR code or something. And then behind the scenes, you'll be using your channel to me. You'll pay me, I'll pay someone else, they'll pay someone else, they'll pay the person you're trying to pay. And then it'll all happen in a way where either the payment fails for everyone or it succeeds for everyone. So essentially, when you are paying over Lightning, right, the key thing is you're not actually going on chain. So it's very fast, a second or two. You don't have to wait for block times and things like this. And also, you're not paying for block space. There's still a fee involved. You have to pay in order to use other people's liquidity because they're essentially locking up their own Bitcoin in their channels for you in order to facilitate this. So they'll take a small fee, but it's nothing like a block fee. It's like, as I mentioned, everything on the Lightning Network is denominated in millisatoshis.
Right. Okay. But let's just say I open up.
So Peter.
Yep.
When you guys get through this, I'm going to do what I always do when you respond with people won't care. And I'm going to jump in with something that they have to care about.
That's good. And you should do. But I just want to do a couple more questions with Nadav. Okay. So Nadav, I open up a channel with you. That's my only channel open. And I've opened it up with 0.05 Bitcoin. That's the maximum amount of I can spend. Once I spend that,
so long
I'm
as
out of
you
liquidity.
don't receive. If you don't receive anything and you're just spending, then that's the Bitcoin that you have to spend. If you wanted more, you would have to lock up more.
Okay,
channels.
But what about if I open up with 0.05 Bitcoin, a channel with you, but your channel has does your channel have to match mine, or can you have less Bitcoin in your side?
Good question. So these days, and this is already changing, I believe C Lightning, which is an implementation of a Lightning node, already has this feature. But these days, when you open a channel, only one side funds the channel, so they start with all of the funds. But in the very near future, as I mentioned, this has already been done in the real world, in the wild. We will have dual funded channels where both parties, the opening process is a bit more complicated, right? It requires this coordination when you open a channel, but which is why we didn't start with this. It was like a next step. But with dual funded channels, essentially both parties will have funds. And since, right, this is just locked up on chain, each channel has a fixed capacity, for the sum of both sides. But yeah, when you make a payment, your side will have less, my side will have more. And then, if you receive a payment, it'll go back. So there's kind of, when you're running a Lightning channel, you do kind of have to think about at least a little bit this liquidity, right? If someone wanted to pay you, then I have to have enough on my side of the channel in order to facilitate that payment. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to, right? If you wanted to pay more than 0.05, right, then you wouldn't be able to just by using this one channel. Likewise, if I only have 0.001 on my side and someone wants to pay you 0.002, then I'm not going to be able to facilitate that either. So you need both inbound and outbound kind of liquidity or Bitcoin that's pointing at you and Bitcoin that you are pointing outwards. And in the future, this is all just going to be handled for you. I think some wallets even today, I think Phoenix does a lot of this just for you. You don't have to worry about kind of all of this rebalancing and stuff like that. Though it is pretty early days for the Lightning Network. So there's still plenty of wallets out there and desktop apps and such that you would have to do a lot of this management somewhat manually. And that is a big barrier to entry for a lot of people if they're using those those kinds of wallets. But rest assured that not only are there already these things, but in the future, all of this stuff is going to be hidden. You're just going to, have a wallet, on your phone or something where you can pay people and people can pay you, and it'll just manage, who has how much in your channels and things like this.
Okay, so the next thing that I'm thinking about with this, Nadav, is that when I open a channel, I am essentially committing Bitcoin to the blockchain. So I'm paying a transaction fee for that. And when we close a channel, the same happens. Now, sometimes the network can be quite congested. So I could be paying a fairly high fee. Let's just pick a moderately high fee, say $20 to open a channel. So really, I kind of don't want to be opening a channel with $50 of liquidity because I could be paying a high fee. So it feels like I need to be opening one with a certain amount of liquidity. But could you also be a bit of a dick and force close a channel and I suddenly have to pay a fee?
Yes. So that's certainly like the right kind of concern to have. I will say some of this stuff is made better, especially for channel opening, by soon there will be services, if there aren't already. I know that at least some of this stuff has been done in the wild, though it might have been more of a proof of concept. But you can essentially open a channel along with a bunch of other people opening a channel, all in this one big transaction where everyone essentially saves on fees by doing this. And it's better for privacy. It's kind of like a coin join mixed into opening a Lightning channel. Like no one knows which one's yours kind of thing. So that helps a little bit. But at the end of the day, yes, opening and closing channels requires on-chain interaction, at least today. In the future, there's super futuristic, awesome tech like channel factories and other stuff that hopefully will help mitigate this even further, where you can open, or, there's other things like, as Shinobi mentioned, you could, in theory, have Lightning channels on Liquid that, you open and close them on Liquid, and then you're still able to interact with people who have channels open on Bitcoin itself and things like this. So I think there are, as time goes on, when this becomes a bigger problem, we're going to have better solutions for it. But yeah, I think one of the key things is you're going to want to lock up. You're not going to want to open very small channels. You're going to want to have a few, not a ton of channels, but you're going to want some relatively larger, more reliable channels with people who aren't just going to force close on you. So that's another piece, is that as the Lightning Network matures, nodes are going to be more conscientious about who they open channels with. And, if someone consistently is just force closing on them, you're not going to open a channel with them. And
also splicing too is another potential here, where instead of closing out a channel, your party could just kind of take their money out of it, but then open it up right again with your money still in the channel if they needed to do something else.
Yeah. So essentially, one reason someone might want to close a channel on you is because, they need these funds. And so, if it's not like a griefing attack where they're doing it just to mess with you, then there are some alternatives for them so that they won't have to close your channel and make things inconvenient for you. What they can do instead, two things. One, Shinobi just mentioned, is called splicing, which is where you can essentially, via an on-chain transaction, presumably that they would pay for at least some of, you can essentially take your on-chain shared custody and spend it into a new on-chain shared custody spot. So, your 2 of 2 into a new 2 of 2, but where it has less in it, and they took some of their balance and just had an on-chain output. So that's one way of just like withdrawing without closing your channel. Another way is to use something called a submarine swap. These days, I think it's usually called loop out instead, because Lightning Labs has a project called Loop. And essentially what this lets you do is you pay someone on Lightning and they pay you on chain. And you use that same atomic swap I talked about that you used for routing. You use that with the on-chain Bitcoin payment to make it atomic as well. So essentially it's a way of doing a swap of on-chain for off-chain coins. So you go to like Lightning Labs or someone who's running one of these services, you pay them on Lightning and you withdraw on chain. So there really isn't a need to close your channel if you just like need to withdraw your funds. There are alternatives. But Peter, I think you are still right in worrying about like, what if, Shinobi and I have a channel open and he's mad at me and he just wants to like be a dick and close his channel on me. But that is something to think about.
Well, it just sounds like to me we're very early and all these kind of scenarios are still being figured out. Do you imagine we will get to a scenario whereby some people will only ever hold Bitcoin, which is on the Lightning Network? They won't know the difference. It'll be on their phone. I'm trying to imagine that scenario, but for that scenario to happen, there has to be Bitcoin locked up on the main chain. So who is that locked up by where, and how do they not steal that Bitcoin? But that's like something in my mind.
Yeah. So I think that it's totally feasible, and I think it's already happening to a small degree, especially with things like Strike, which let you essentially debit from your bank account and then get funds directly over Lightning. And as I mentioned, right, we will have dual funded channels, but you can still have channels that are just singly funded, right? Where your counterparty put in all of the initial on-chain funds and say like, you paid them from your bank account or something like this, right? You can have those kinds of schemes where you end up with funds on Lightning, which means you have like private keys. You're one of the two signers on that shared custody 2 of 2 multisig, but you didn't fund any of that Bitcoin that went into that shared custody, right? Like they took your US dollars or your pounds or something like this. So I think it's totally feasible and definitely a part of the vision for a lot of people working on the Lightning Network, working on Lightning Network wallets and things like this, that in the future, you won't even have to go through on-chain Bitcoin in order to get onboarded and just instantly start like using Lightning enabled applications and things like this.
So Peter, I think this is a perfect transition into the things users have to care about and understand.
All right, do it.
So one of the things we didn't get into so far is the mechanism that really makes this kind of updating the transactions something you can do securely. And so pretty much every time you do that, what you're doing is you're exchanging a key, or you're kind of passing that off to the other party that goes to like a little if clause in the Bitcoin. That is another way to spend the outputs that this pre-signed transaction creates. And so that key pretty much, if they take the transaction that you do this exchange for and they try to submit it to the blockchain in the future, this extra key lets you just take all of their Bitcoin. Because like pretty much what they're doing is they're taking an old balance that you guys have since changed, so this is not where the money should be going, and they're submitting it to try to steal from you. And so that's kind of enforced with this extra clause in those outputs and this key that you exchange, that if somebody does that, the other guy can just take all of your money. Like, bad, you tried to steal from me, this is your punishment for it. And so there are some things that users just have to be aware of if they're going to use the Lightning Network. The first one is, if you lose any of those keys for old transactions that you guys have revoked, or if you lose the most recent pre-signed transaction that hasn't been revoked yet, you're in big trouble, because that means, one, you don't have the ability now to just take your money out by yourself. You need that person's cooperation, because all you have are these old ones that if he sees on chain, he's just going to steal all your money. And on the other token, if you lose some of those keys for the revoked transactions to punish them, if they ever found out about that or became aware of that, they have a bunch of these old transactions where they might have more money than they should. And they could get away with submitting that if they got that confirmed before you confirm the most recent one. And you don't have that key that lets you kind of take the money to make things right. And so, like, you have to be very aware of that. Like, losing that information puts you in a very bad situation where your money's at risk. And
Right.
also, this is kind of enforced on the other side by time locks. So you have to come online within that time lock and check things every once in a while to make sure that your counterparty didn't do something like take an old transaction and try to steal money from you. Or you have to have somebody doing that for you. Like there's plans for something called a watchtower, which is something you would talk to when you transact, and it would have all of the things necessary to punish somebody if they try to steal from you, and just always be online looking for that. But like these are things you have to understand if you're using Lightning, or you're not really aware of the risks you're taking.
Yeah, I think maybe a succinct way of thinking about like what are the, say new security considerations is, let's picture kind of this scenario where someone is trying to, say, double spend you. So we have our current state, right, which is just this fully valid, fully signed Bitcoin transaction that spends our 2 of 2, our shared custody coins, to you and me, but that we just don't broadcast, right? So we have that. And now say me and Shinobi have a channel open. I pay Shinobi like a large amount. And then say after I pay him a large amount, I attempt to broadcast that old state where I hadn't yet paid him. So this would be like me trying to double spend, right? I've spent it on the Lightning Network, and now I'm trying to reclaim it on chain. So what stops me from doing that? So the key thing, no pun intended, is that when I made that payment to Shinobi, how I do it is we create a new state, right? A new transaction that spends that same 2 of 2 shared custody. That now, instead of sending, say, let's put numbers to it. Say we each start with 1 Bitcoin in the channel. So I get 1, he gets 1 in the first state. And then in this new state, I get like 0.5 and he gets 1.5. So say I pay him like half a Bitcoin over the Lightning Network. And then what happens then is we create this new transaction where I get 0.5, he gets 1.5. Then we fully sign it. But this isn't considered the new state until we do one more thing, which is revoke the old transaction. Now, the question is, how do you revoke a Bitcoin transaction, right? There's kind of this key thing where once a Bitcoin transaction, or once something is valid, it's never going to become invalid. You can't just like literally. Oh, I'm out of focus all of a sudden. You can't literally make it so that like the signatures are no longer valid or something like this. There's no way of doing that. So instead, what we do is we actually, rather than just saying like, I get 1 Bitcoin, he gets 1 Bitcoin, we make it conditional. We say, I get 1 Bitcoin, but I can only claim it after this like waiting period. And that's like the waiting period that he has to like go to court, right? To contest. Like if I publish an old state, he has that amount of time in order to go on the blockchain and be like, no, this is an old state. So there's another spending branch. So the coins that are on my side of the channel, I can only spend after a time lock, but Shinobi can spend them without a time lock if he knows the secret called the revocation secret. So when I revoke an old state, what that means is I just give him that secret. I essentially give him the ability to take all of my coins if I publish an old state. And that's how we update our Lightning channels. We just constantly are giving each other the ability to punish, or we're giving the other person the ability to punish us if we do something that we're not supposed to, right? If we violate the rules of this Lightning channel. But what that means is you have to keep all of these secrets, right? You have to keep the ability to punish your counterparty. And you have to be online at least once every contest period. in order to make sure that they haven't cheated you. So, for example, on LND or LND backed wallets, I believe the default these days is 2 weeks. So you have to have your nodes synced. You have to look at the blockchain and make sure that your UTXO still hasn't been spent at least once every 2 weeks. Or, as Shinobi mentioned, have a watchtower doing that for you. But then you're trusting them, or you could have a bunch of watchtowers and you're trusting that at least one of them is online and playing nice. The second thing is you also have to keep the current state, because if you don't have that, then you no longer have the ability to close the channel and claim your funds. So those are the new things that you do need to be aware of, is that you have to be online at least once every contest period, where that is, there's a default. I think on some wallets, it is even as small as every day. But those are like wallets that you would have to run on your laptop and set up and know what you're doing, kind of thing. I think the default these days for nodes people more normal non-engineer people use tend to have a default closer to like once every 2 weeks. And if you do know what you're doing, you can change this to be more. The trade-off, though, is the longer you have, the less you have to be online, less constraint. But if you do close your channel non-cooperatively, then you have to wait longer before you actually get those funds back. So that's kind of just a built-in trade-off. But I think that is the main thing.
It's kind of like multi-sig. It's just like it's more complicated than just one key on chain. So you just have to think about this other data. And I think that's kind of universal to any new way of interacting with Bitcoin.
But Peter, I will note, I think while these are important, especially moving forward, if you have larger amounts, a lot of people using Lightning today, you just have like $10 on your phone or something. And like worst case, you lose $10. Like, I think for small amounts, it's entirely reasonable to be a bit more laissez-faire about these things. And I think that there are a lot of use cases for Lightning in like gaming and things like this, where you really don't need much more than that.
Yeah, I'm still very much like, I don't want to know all this. I know it pisses people off. I just don't.
Yeah, we're working on hiding it from you.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Actually, it's not to be disrespectful at all in any way at all, but I'm just trying to think, generally speaking. I'm looking forward to this all being abstracted away, and I know a lot of it is, and there's an amazing work being done. But and Shinobi, I know you're saying I should know this stuff, but like the Bitcoin base chain is really easy for me to understand, right? I know I can self-custody it. I know I can run my own node. I know how a multi-sig kind of works. And if I just want to transfer value, I just send it to another address and it's gone. It's either in my wallet or in their wallet. There's a lot of intricacies, and I know people don't need to know this, but when you talk about, if you know a secret, blah, 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 and you have to keep the secret, I think a lot of that just needs to be abstracted away. I still think I will use the Lightning Network and just kind of hope it works and not care about these things in the background.
But there's still the key things you need, and you need to understand. Like, to use Bitcoin on chain, you need to understand your keys, your mnemonic seed, how to keep that safe. And, you need to understand the consequences of what a UTXO are. So if you're going to use Lightning, like you need to at least understand the basic concept of these channel updates and these things that you can't lose without putting your money at risk.
Yeah, I understand.
I do think, though, that a lot of this, like, if you're thinking about, for example, on-chain, a lot of it just reduces to like keeping your seed safe, right? Like if you have the backup, you're going to be okay. And I think one of the things in Lightning that's going to make this a lot more user-friendly, that is, there are a lot of different ways of doing this being tested. A lot of them already are out there, but backup mechanisms for Lightning channels, right? If we can reduce this to like, so long as you have access to your Lightning channel backup, then you don't need to worry, is kind of the goal for where we want to go with a lot of this stuff as well. So I think that'll make it much easier to use as well. At least for the things you have to know become simpler if you have a way of like generating all the things you need to know from just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Actually, I think this is a good place to maybe just get into like the concept of a Lightning service provider. and just kind of how that's functioning today to abstract.
I hope that's what I think it might be. Because I tell you what, again, another controversial thing right now, because I keep so little Bitcoin in Lightning. Well, actually, I've got a counterpoint to that. I did used to keep so little Bitcoin in Lightning. I had like $400 in, but obviously since then we've had a massive price run up, so that Bitcoin's worth a lot more. But generally speaking, I was quite happy with the custodial Lightning solution because I had so little Bitcoin in there, and I know that's not the not what people want to hear, but I was happy to risk that amount in a custodial service. Ironically, now I'm not because the price has gone up 12x.
Well, I would say custodial Lightning services would definitely qualify as LSPs, but I'd say it's a little more expansive than just that. Like I think the best non-custodial example would probably be Breeze. It's a very simple wallet. I think they've even recently integrated the Sphinx Chat or podcasting 2.0 streaming payments for that. But like the way they structure that is in addition to just being a wallet, like they're actually a service provider beyond that. Like they will actually open a channel to you with liquidity so that you can actually receive money easily over the Lightning Network. Like all of the issues Nadav brought up with like him having to have enough on his side of the channel for you to be able to receive those payments. Like they kind of step in and they will front load a channel with money on their end so that the user can just open the wallet, click, and they're receiving money. And they also function, and this is something I would say users should think about and be aware of. They will watch the blockchain for you as well, to kind of scan and check and react to that. But given that they open the channel to you and they're literally the person that the other side of that channel, the other part of that key, they're watching in case of a screw up or like a malicious employee. But like that doesn't really add anything if you assume Breeze themselves will just start acting maliciously. So, that's something that a user should be aware of and consider when they're using that. But like these kind of opportunities to offer like the little services there to smooth over the user experience problems, like that's becoming a thing now. That's how a lot of these wallets have been able to capture like a non-technical user base and actually get them using Lightning. And I think that's really for at least the next couple years, I think going to be the way that issues kind of get papered over and managed. And like another thing they'll do is I believe Breeze and a lot of other wallets, they will handle kind of encrypting all the channel backup stuff you need to a key from your seed mnemonic and then push it encrypted to like a cloud storage, like Apple or Google Drive. And it's just all these little ways to kind of automate and hide that from the user. And so I think it's really important if you're going to run out and like start using Lightning with like these apps and wallets like this, like you should just kind of be aware of and consider the fact that there's a little more trust sometimes getting interjected into that wouldn't exist with just like an on-chain wallet you get from Google Play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think Lightning, and with Lightning service providers, you get kind of this really, you get to like, there's the trade-off between, at least these days, hopefully a lot of this goes away in the future, but this trade-off between how much you're trusting someone else and how easy it is for you to use this complex new technology. But I think the cool thing is this like very wide spectrum, and you can like go all in and like don't trust anybody. Always have a node online somewhere or multiple nodes. Do whatever you want and take care of this all yourself. But you're going to have some maybe a little bit more technical expertise, or you can go like custodial. You don't have to worry about anything. But then there's also kind of all of this room in between that we can start filling in using Lightning service providers, where like you only have to worry about like these things and everything else you're trusting other people for. So it's like not custodial, but so it's like better than something that's custodial, but there's still some trust involved. Not as much as like a custodial wallet, but I think there's like this nice kind of spectrum of like how much you're trusting versus how much you need to do. And there's probably some nice middle point for everyone, though I think everyone should start just with like a little bit on a custodial wallet. I think it's just a great way to get started. And then later on, if it's something that you're going to use regularly or have a decent amount of funds in, then you're going to want to figure out somewhere closer to the middle.
Okay, right. There's lots to think about here. I think I'm going to call time on this one because we've done a lot. There's a lot to contemplate here. I think in summary for myself is I have no use for Liquid right now, but I'm going to keep an eye on it. I can see scenarios where I would maybe consider using it, but right now I won't. Absolutely no chance in hell I'm going to wrap any of my Bitcoin and risk that shit. And I think
you're not planning on minting what Bitcoin did coin?
P-coin. Well, maybe I'll do P-coin at some point. But I need to spend a bit more time looking at Lightning, a bit more time understanding Lightning, but I think I'm going to spend some time playing with some wallets that I like and that kind of work without me having to think about it. I think I'm going to take a look at Breeze, have a bit of a play with that. But no, this is very useful. I appreciate both of you. I am interested to see what the feedback from this will be, whether we've gone too techie or not tech enough. But I'll let you both know.
Cool. Do we want to really briefly mention like some wallets for people if they're interested in
list some favorite wallets?
Yeah, so I think Blue Wallet is most people's custodial wallet of choice. So this is like, you don't want to worry about anything, just use Blue Wallet. And they have Lightning wallets are their custodial solution. Breeze is another great one that's kind of, somewhere closer to the middle. It's technically, non-custodial, but you are using Breeze and maybe trusting them a little bit. I think Wallet of Satoshi is another, I want to say, custodial wallet. And then for non-custodial wallets, you have Phoenix, which tries to hide a decent amount from you in terms of like, you don't have to do everything, but it's doing it for you, the app, and it's with your keys on your phone. It's non-custodial, sorry. And then there's Zeus is another non-custodial option. There are others out there, but yeah, and I think folks
Zap
like
from Jack Mahler's too.
Yeah,
it's another nice non-custodial one.
Yeah, but anyway, I just wanted to mention those in case like people listen to this and want to play around.
No, and that's useful, and we'll stick it in the show notes. I think I'm going to go and have a play with them, though. I mean, I know Blue Wallet. I know Nuno. I've got Blue Wallet. I think he's done some great work working on the UX of that recently, which is very cool. I think I've downloaded Breeze, but never played with it. So I think I'm going to go and have a play with 2 or 3 of those, see how I get on. Nadav, I do want to say thank you for coming on. That's your first appearance. I know we got something else planned in the future, so we're gonna hopefully.
You best be having him on shortly to talk about DLCs.
We don't, and I don't know. Like, I've got to think what's useful to the people who listen to my show. I think that's a cool topic, but I think that's probably more aligned with something like Marty or Stefan Livera. I think I know my audience, and I think some of Nadal's more detailed explanations on what's wrong with other blockchains or the risks they're making so they can consider their investment is the kind of show I want to make with him, because I know I've probably got the less hardcore Bitcoin and some of those people who might be considering putting money into other investments / trades. I think we're going to touch on that.
It's okay, Nadav. I'll dump a bucket of water on his head in Miami.
We will do DLCs at one point. We will do it. We'll cover it at some point. All right. Well, listen, Shinobi, I will see you in Miami. Secretly somewhere.
I'll be there too.
We'll see you both there. I'm going to organize a party, so you should both come.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that should be fun. Shinobi was a secret guest at the last one, but nobody knew who he was.
They knew the guy with the beard though. if you asked anybody, they've remembered him.
That photo came up. Did I send it to you? That photo came up on my phone recently.
I don't think you did. I just still chuckle over the fact that half of Bitcoin Twitter thought that I would somehow sneakily get selfied without my permission.
You gave me permission. I got permission.
Yeah,
And what happens?
And then everybody immediately screamed at you like Shinobi wouldn't have given you permission.
I fucking did. He's smiling at it, but I've never. I didn't put it on Twitter or anything, did I?
No, you did. I told you to, and then everyone started
that was it. That was it. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, fuck Pete. Pete's done something wrong again. All right. Well, listen. Look, I loved this. Appreciate it. Appreciate you, Nadav. It's good to get to know you now, and it'll be good to get you back on the show. Shinobi, we will circle back and figure out what we're going to do next month. And thanks, guys.